Every chosen one reaches a season where heaven feels distant. You pray, but the answers feel delayed. You seek direction, but confusion seems louder. You try to walk in alignment, yet obstacles appear out of nowhere. Many begin to ask, why is God not speaking to me the way He used to? Why does it feel like my prayers are hitting a wall? What most don't realize is that there are subtle but powerful barriers, internal and external, blocking clarity, guidance, and divine communication. These barriers often hide in familiar routines and emotional patterns, silently disconnecting you from God's voice. Before we go deeper into these 9 spiritual barriers, I encourage you, if this message reaches you in a moment you needed it, to subscribe so you don't miss the wisdom meant for your growth. And if this resonates with your spirit, type 1111 in the comments as a sign of alignment, openness, and divine blessing flowing into your life. 1. Internal noise. God often speaks in stillness, but many chosen ones are surrounded by internal storms so loud that divine whispers cannot be heard. Overthinking becomes a constant echo chamber, repeating fears, replaying painful memories, analyzing every small detail, and drowning out the gentle instructions God sends. Worry pulls your attention into possible outcomes that never happen, creating imagined battles that exhaust your spirit before the real day even arrives. The mind becomes so saturated with what-ifs, and maybe this and maybe that the voice of God, which moves softly, is pushed into the background. God does not shout over chaos. He has no reason to compete with noise created by fear, anxiety, or doubt. Stillness is His language, and clarity flows only into a quiet heart. But when your internal world is loud, your spiritual receptors weaken. Even when God is speaking, you cannot tell if it is Him or your anxiety pretending to sound divine. The enemy knows this. He knows a quiet soul is dangerous because a quiet soul becomes aligned, sharp, and aware of heaven's codes and directions. So he amplifies the noise through mental clutter, emotional flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, and unnecessary worries, hoping to drown out God's messages. Many chosen ones are not disconnected from God. They are simply overwhelmed internally. They pray but cannot feel peace. Not because God is absent, but because their spiritual antenna is buried under layers of mental static. The noise becomes a barrier to discernment. When your mind is racing, revelation becomes distorted. When you cannot slow down, you cannot tune in. God's voice has not stopped. Your inner storm is too loud. Only when the chosen one learns to silence the mind, through prayer, fasting, rest, stillness, or intentional focus, does divine clarity return. Quietness is not weakness. It is the atmosphere where God's voice becomes unmistakably clear. 2. Unhealed emotions. Unhealed emotions act like filters over your spiritual ears, coloring how you perceive God, people, and even your own destiny. When pain from betrayal is still sitting in your spirit, you may interpret God's warnings as fear-based paranoia, or you may assume every closed door is another rejection instead of protection. Rejection can distort your relationship with God to the point where you feel unworthy of blessings He has already prepared for you. Trauma can make you resist what God sends because you have learned, consciously or unconsciously, to associate good things with eventual loss. Emotional wounds can shape your spiritual perception more powerfully than any external influence. Many chosen ones are not lacking divine instruction. They are simply hearing through layers of hurt that bend the message. It's like trying to read a message through cracked glass. The words are there, but the distortion changes what you think you see. When your heart is bruised, you start expecting disappointment. So even when God says go, you may hear danger, and when He says wait, you may hear abandonment. Pain becomes the interpreter, and pain is a terrible translator. It will always twist spiritual truth. Unhealed emotions also create defensive barriers around your intuition, making you hesitant to trust your own discernment. You become hypervigilant, questioning everything. Is this really God? Or is it just my imagination? But the deeper issue is that your emotional wounds are louder than your spiritual sensitivity. God's voice is gentle, steady, loving, but trauma echoes in sharp, fearful tones. Until the chosen one confronts and heals the hurt, God's guidance will continue to feel unclear, inconsistent, or confusing. Healing restores spiritual accuracy. When the heart is whole, divine messages become direct again. The problem was never silence. It was distortion. 3. Wrong attachments. It becomes nearly impossible to hear God clearly when you are tied to people who are not part of your destiny. Some relationships drain your spirit, pulling your energy into cycles of conflict, gossip, drama, or emotional obligation. Some friendships distract you from your assignment because they anchor you to environments your spirit has already outgrown. Certain environments suffocate your spiritual senses, numbing your intuition and weakening your discernment. When you remain connected to those who are misaligned with your calling, your spiritual frequency becomes disrupted. God may be sending guidance, but the noise of these attachments overwhelms your sensitivity. Many chosen ones miss divine direction because they stay loyal to connections God has already released them from. Loyalty to the wrong people can delay destiny more than any spiritual attack. When you hold on to individuals who operate from jealousy, selfishness, confusion, or negativity, their energy becomes a fog around your spirit. It becomes harder to know if the caution you feel is God nudging you or the anxiety coming from their influence. Some people are not evil, they are simply not aligned. And misalignment can be just as spiritually destructive as outright harm. When your circle is full of those who do not share your values, your purpose, or your growth, the voice of God becomes faint. God often speaks through peace, but peace cannot survive where the wrong people live. Many chosen ones do not realize that their discernment becomes sharper the moment they disconnect from certain individuals. Once the wrong attachments are removed, the static clears, and suddenly God's guidance becomes crisp, strong, and unmistakable. The silence you thought was heaven withholding was actually heaven waiting for you to detach. God will not compete with voices that drown out his own. Once the chosen one lets go, the clarity flows. 4. Disobedience to previous instructions. God does not release new guidance when old instructions remain unfulfilled. Many chosen ones cry out, "God is silent," but the silence is not punishment. It is a pause. A necessary, intentional pause waiting for obedience. Heaven operates through order, and spiritual assignments build step by step. When you delay obedience, you delay destiny. When you ignore a previous instruction, whether it was to leave a relationship, start a mission, move to a different environment, forgive someone, or fix a habit, you unintentionally block the next phase of direction. God does not waste revelation. He will not give you step 5 when step 3 is still untouched. Many chosen ones confuse God's stillness with abandonment, but it is really alignment. God is waiting for your action before giving you more. It's like a teacher who cannot hand you the next chapter until you complete the current one. Not because the teacher is withholding, but because progression requires foundation. When a chosen one keeps asking God, "What should I do next?" heaven responds, "Do what I already told you." Each instruction is connected. Each step unlocks the next. Sometimes God's silence is a divine reminder. You already know what to do, complete it. But spiritual procrastination, fear, or confusion can make you stagnate. You may be praying for clarity while heaven is waiting for movement. You may be pleading for direction while God is waiting for obedience. Once you finally follow the previous instruction, the fog lifts. The next step becomes obvious, natural, and almost effortless. There is no greater clarity than obedience. When you honor what God already said, divine momentum returns. The silence breaks, the path becomes illuminated once again. Not because God finally answered, but because obedience opened the channel that was blocked. 5. Secret habits and hidden cycles. This is not judgment. It is spiritual reality. Repeated habits that weaken your spirit, even if hidden from others, can cloud your ability to hear God clearly. Secret struggles, whether emotional, mental, or behavioral, carry weight, and spiritual weight affects spiritual sensitivity. When guilt grows, prayer becomes harder. When shame increases, confidence in approaching God decreases. These cycles create an internal heaviness that makes divine whispers feel distant. The issue is not that God stopped speaking, it's that your spirit is too weighed down to receive. Hidden cycles often come with emotional baggage, regret, frustration, self-condemnation, and these emotions form barriers around your intuition. When you feel unworthy, you stop expecting to hear God. When you feel stuck, you stop believing clarity will come. The enemy uses these cycles to isolate you, telling you that you cannot seek God while struggling, when in reality, God is the place you must run to. But the shame attached to secret habits convinces you to hide, and hiding distances you from divine instruction. These hidden patterns also drain your energy, leaving you spiritually exhausted even before the day begins. When your internal world is heavy, it becomes difficult to distinguish God's voice from your own feelings of inadequacy. You may confuse conviction with condemnation, or you may mistake God's guidance for your own anxiety. But once you confront these cycles, not with fear, but with honesty and surrender, your spiritual clarity begins to rebuild. God is not looking for perfection. He is looking for willingness. The moment you release the weight of secret struggles, your spiritual hearing sharpens again. The heaviness lifts, the path becomes clearer. The voice you thought had disappeared was always there. Your spirit was simply too burdened to listen. Freedom restores discernment, and once the weight is removed, revelation flows freely. 6. Impatience. Many chosen ones desire answers instantly. Direction now, confirmation now, breakthrough now. Impatience becomes a spiritual pressure that pushes them into decisions God never authorized and timelines heaven never planned. When the heart is restless, the spirit becomes loud in all the wrong ways. You begin to interpret impatience as urgency, anxiety as insight, and pressure as divine instruction. But God often speaks slowly, deliberately, and intentionally. His voice is not rushed, and his timing is never desperate. Impatience is dangerous because it creates spiritual illusions. It makes you believe that if you don't act now, you'll miss your opportunity, when in truth, anything God intends for you cannot be taken from you. Impatience makes you step ahead of divine timing and settle for counterfeit blessings, opportunities that look right, feel right, and sound right, but are completely out of alignment with destiny. When you hurry, you begin accepting signs that are not from God simply because they appear convenient. You ignore red flags. You distort discernment. You force outcomes that were never meant to be forced. And when the pace of your life becomes too loud, the voice of God becomes quiet. Not because he stopped speaking, but because your speed makes subtle guidance impossible to hear. God's voice thrives in patience. Patience opens your spiritual senses, sharpens your intuition, and grounds your decisions in wisdom rather than emotion. Impatience removes you from that spiritual center. The enemy loves impatient chosen ones because they can be misled by urgency. He knows that if he can't block your blessing, he can rush you into the wrong thing before the right thing arrives. Many chosen ones have lost years, opportunities, and peace simply because they could not wait long enough to see God's full picture. But when you learn to slow down, truly slow down, and trust the divine pace, everything shifts. Clarity returns. Discernment deepens. You stop chasing answers and begin receiving them. God speaks most clearly to the heart that is willing to wait. 7. Fear. Fear blocks divine clarity more than almost anything else. Fear shrinks your faith and magnifies your imagination in the worst possible ways. It takes small uncertainties and inflates them into overwhelming threats. Fear makes you hear danger when God is actually saying move forward. It makes you freeze when God is telling you to step out. Fear creates illusions that look real, sound real, and feel real. But they are nothing more than shadows, designed to distract you from your destiny. When fear becomes the loudest voice in your life, it becomes nearly impossible to distinguish God's direction. Fear clouds your discernment to the point where every instruction feels risky, every opportunity feels dangerous, and every new step feels like a trap. You begin to confuse your anxiety with intuition and your caution with divine warning. Fear also disrupts your spiritual sensitivity. God often speaks in confidence, assurance, and peace, but fear speaks in panic, confusion, and worst-case scenarios. When you are afraid, your spirit becomes closed. You interpret everything through a lens of insecurity. What if it fails? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm not good enough? These internal questions drown out the calm, steady guidance God offers. Fear disconnects you from divine purpose because it convinces you that you are safer staying where you are instead of going where God is leading. The enemy uses fear to keep chosen ones small, silent, and stagnant, not because they lack calling, but because they lack courage. Fear does not mean God is silent. It means your inner world is too overwhelmed to recognize His voice. But the moment you confront fear, not by pretending it doesn't exist, but by refusing to obey it, your spiritual clarity begins to return. Faith restores your hearing, peace becomes possible again, and the voice of God, once muted by fear, becomes unmistakable, strong, and reassuring. Fear may challenge you, but it cannot stop you unless you surrender to it. When faith rises, fear loses its power, and divine direction becomes clear once more. 8. The need for control. A chosen one who tries to control every outcome unknowingly builds a spiritual wall that blocks divine flow. Control often comes from fear. Fear that God won't come through. Fear that things won't work out. Fear of losing what you care about, or fear of repeating past pain. So you begin strategizing every detail of your life, planning every possibility, and trying to anticipate every scenario. But control is a heavy burden, and it disrupts your sensitivity to God's direction. God's voice becomes clearer when you surrender, not when you tighten your grip. When you try to orchestrate everything yourself, you close your heart to unexpected blessings and divine surprises. You become so focused on protecting yourself that you leave no room for God to do what only He can do. Control narrows your vision. You can only see what you can manage. But God's plan is always bigger than what your hands can handle. When you cling too tightly to plans, timelines, relationships, expectations, God waits. Not because He is withholding, but because He refuses to compete with your fear disguised as control. Many chosen ones mistake overthinking for responsibility, but in reality, it is often a lack of trust. Divine guidance flows where surrender exists. When you stop forcing outcomes, you begin to feel God leading you with ease. The anxiety fades, the confusion settles, the path unfolds step by step. The need for control makes you deaf to God's whisper because you are too busy directing your own steps. But once you release your grip, once you finally let go of the illusion that you must manage everything alone, your spiritual clarity strengthens. You begin hearing God not through worry, but through peace. You stop reacting from fear and start moving from faith. Control is exhausting, surrender is transformative, and a surrendered chosen one hears God with profound clarity. 9. Spiritual exhaustion. Even the strongest chosen one becomes disconnected when spiritually drained. Spiritual exhaustion dulls your discernment, weakens your intuition, and makes even simple decisions feel overwhelming. When you are tired, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, the voice of God becomes distant, not because he is silent, but because you lack the strength to listen deeply. Fatigue clouds your perception. You begin mistaking spiritual attacks for ordinary stress, and ordinary stress for spiritual warfare. Your ability to sense God's peace fades. Your inner world becomes cluttered with worries and responsibilities you have been carrying for too long. Spiritual exhaustion often comes from constant giving energy, giving support, giving encouragement, while receiving little replenishment in return. It also comes from fighting battles without resting, carrying burdens without relief, and trying to stay strong without pause. When your spirit is worn down, everything feels heavier. Prayer feels harder, meditation feels distant, worship feels mechanical. You lose the emotional capacity to tune into the gentle, subtle voice of God. But exhaustion is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you have been operating beyond your capacity for too long. God never designed the chosen one to live in continuous warfare without rest. Rest is spiritual. Stillness is healing. Renewal is necessary. When you allow yourself to rest, truly rest, your spiritual senses begin to reawaken. Suddenly the fog lifts, the confusion lightens, the heaviness fades. Clarity returns not because God changed, but because you renewed. Rest restores revelation. A refreshed spirit hears God with precision, peace, and depth. Many chosen ones think something is wrong with their faith when they can't hear God, but often nothing is wrong. They are simply tired. When exhaustion lifts, the divine voice you thought disappeared becomes clear once again. If any of these 9 barriers resonated with you, understand this clearly: God has not abandoned you. His voice has not disappeared. His guidance has not stopped. You are simply navigating the same obstacles every chosen one must face before stepping into their next level of spiritual elevation. Quiet your mind. Heal your heart. Release wrong connections. Act on what God already said. Break old cycles. Be patient. Release fear. Surrender control. Restore your spirit. When you do, the voice of God will return louder, clearer, and more undeniable than ever before. Is the Zillion Mind Channel. If this message was exactly what your soul needed, remember to type 1111 for divine alignment. Thank you for watching.